My name is Celeste Marchetti. I'm 44, and I've spent 19 years as a certified court reporter, meaning it is, quite literally, my job to produce an exact, legally admissible record of what people say. So when my aunt called me on a Sunday afternoon and said, "Sign this or lose the house," I didn't argue. I hit record. Two-party consent state, and I'd already had a lawyer tell me, months earlier when this whole thing started smelling wrong, exactly how to do it legally. What she said in the next 4 minutes became the single most useful document I've ever produced in my career, and I've transcribed murder trials. Welcome back to Channel Name, where quiet people stop absorbing the cost of everyone else's choices. If you've ever needed the truth to hold still long enough to prove it, stay till the end. Drop a comment, hit subscribe. My grandmother, Rosa, raised my mother and my Aunt Denise in the same small house in a working-class neighborhood outside Providence, the house my mother eventually inherited when Rosa passed in 2011, and the house I inherited from my mother 3 years ago. When she passed after a long illness, I spent 18 months managing between depositions. Aunt Denise never inherited property of her own. That's not cruelty on anyone's part, it's just how the will was written, twice, by 2 different family members, in 2 different decades. Denise had contested my mother's will briefly back in 2011, lost, and the topic went quiet for over a decade, the way things go quiet in families that prefer peace over precision. I work in rooms where every word gets captured, corrected, and certified. Outside those rooms, in my own family, I'd spent my whole life doing the opposite, letting things go unrecorded, assuming memory and goodwill would be enough. That assumption cost me almost everything this house represented. Here's something I buried and never brought up again. Back in 2015, Denise asked to borrow the house's title documents, saying she needed them for her own records after Grandma Rosa's estate closed. I gave her copies without thinking twice of the family, paperwork, no big deal. 2 years later, I discovered she'd used those copies to apply for a home equity line of credit in her own name against a property she didn't own, using a version of the deed with our grandmother's old, uncorrected ownership record that hadn't yet reflected my mother's inheritance. The bank caught the discrepancy and denied the application before it went anywhere. Denise told me it was a paperwork mix-up on the bank's end, and I let it go, because confronting my mother's only sister over a denied loan application felt like more drama than the incident deserved. I didn't know then that I was watching a rehearsal. 4 months ago, Denise started calling more often, casual at first, asking how I was holding up in that big house alone, mentioning she'd run into a rough patch without specifics. Then the calls got specific. She needed help. Serious help. She wouldn't say with what, only that it was time-sensitive and that family should be able to count on family. I asked, plainly, what she needed. She said she'd rather explain in person. I said I was open to that, but I needed specifics before agreeing to anything. She said I was being difficult about something simple. That Sunday, she called again, and this time she didn't ease into it. She said, and I remember the exact words because I write down exact words for a living, "I need you to sign this quitclaim putting my name on the deed as co-owner, or I'm going to contest your mother's will again, new grounds this time, and you'll lose the house fighting me in court either way. Sign this or lose the house, Celeste. It's easier my way." I sat very still on my kitchen floor, the way you sit still when a witness finally says the thing everyone suspected but nobody could get on record. Want to be honest about something. 3 months before that call, when the rough patch language started, I'd already gotten uneasy enough to consult an estate attorney, a colleague from the courthouse named Priya Anand, just to understand my footing. She told me our state is 2-party consent for phone recording, meaning both parties need to know a call is being recorded for it to be legal and usable. But she also told me there's a simple, fully legal workaround, announcing it. If you say at the start of the call, "I'm recording this for my records," and she continues the conversation, that's valid consent under the law. People rarely hang up. They're usually too committed to what they're about to say. So when Denise called that Sunday, before she got 2 sentences in, I said, clearly, "Denise, I want to let you know I'm recording this call for my own records. given everything going on with the house. She paused for exactly 1 second, said fine, whatever, this is what I'm dealing with, and kept going. Right into the sentence that became my entire case. I didn't interrupt her. I didn't correct her. I let her finish saying every threatening, presumptuous, legally significant word she wanted to say, because a court reporter's first rule is that you never interrupt testimony you need on the record after the call. I did what I do professionally every single day. I produced a certified, time-stamped transcript of the recording myself, using the same standards I'd use for a courtroom record. Then had a colleague independently verify the transcript against the audio for accuracy, since I couldn't ethically certify my own personal recording as an unbiased third party. I brought both the audio file and the verified transcript to Priya. She read it twice, then looked up at me with the particular stillness lawyers get when a case just became much easier than they expected. This isn't just an ugly family conversation, she said. This is an explicit threat to fraudulently contest a valid will unless you transfer property under duress. That's attempted coercion, and depending on how the contest is framed, it edges toward extortion. You have this on tape, properly consented, cleanly transcribed. Most people bring me their memory of a conversation. You brought me a deposition. We pulled the county property records next, my mother's inheritance from Rosa, properly probated in 2011, my inheritance from my mother, properly probated 3 years ago, both filed, both clean, both entirely in my name with no cloud on the title whatsoever. Denise's earlier home equity application attempt from 2015 was still in the bank's old denial file, which Priya subpoenaed as supporting pattern evidence, showing this wasn't a one-time lapse in judgment, but a second attempt at the same underlying claim, years apart. Priya drafted a formal cease and desist, attaching a summary of the recorded threat, and filed a preemptive motion establishing clear title in case Denise did attempt a new will contest, closing the exact door she'd threatened to walk through. My cousin Anthony, Denise's son, invited me to a small family lunch, an attempt, I think, at smoothing things over after Denise had apparently told him I was being cold about helping family. I knew, because Priya had confirmed it 2 days earlier, that the cease and desist letter had already been served and received, and that Denise's own attorney, she'd hired one after receiving it, had advised her the recorded call was, in his words to Priya directly, not a winnable position. Denise didn't know I'd know any of that yet. I went to lunch anyway, transcript printed, folded once, in my bag. Some conversations need paper you can produce instead of a memory someone can later dispute. When a case just became much easier than they expected. This isn't just an ugly family conversation, she said. This is an explicit threat to fraudulently contest a valid will unless you transfer property under duress. That's attempted coercion, and depending on how the contest is framed, it edges toward extortion. You have this on tape, properly consented, cleanly transcribed. Most people bring me their memory of a conversation. You brought me a deposition. We pulled the county property records next, my mother's inheritance from Rosa, properly probated in 2011, my inheritance from my mother, properly probated 3 years ago, both filed, both clean, both entirely in my name with no cloud on the title whatsoever. Denise's earlier home equity application attempt from 2015 was still in the bank's old denial file, which Priya subpoenaed as supporting pattern evidence, showing this wasn't a one-time lapse in judgment, but a second attempt at the same underlying claim, years apart. Priya drafted a formal cease and desist, attaching a summary of the recorded threat, and filed a preemptive motion establishing clear title in case Denise did attempt a new will contest, closing the exact door she'd threatened to walk through. My cousin Anthony, Denise's son, invited me to a small family lunch, an attempt, I think, at smoothing things over after Denise had apparently told him I was being cold about helping family. I knew, because Priya had confirmed it 2 days earlier, that the cease and desist letter had already been served and received, and that Denise's own attorney, she'd hired one after receiving it, had advised her the recorded call was, in his words to Priya directly, not a winnable position. Denise didn't know I'd know any of that yet. I went to lunch anyway, Transcript printed, folded once, in my bag. Some conversations need paper you can produce instead of a memory someone can later dispute. Lunch was pleasant enough until Denise, mid-meal, said to the table generally, "Some people in this family think a lawsuit is the answer to everything instead of just talking things through like adults." She wasn't looking at me when she said it. She didn't need to be. "We did talk it through," I said. "On the phone, 4 months ago. I have the recording." Anthony's fork stopped. Denise's face did the thing I've watched hundreds of witnesses do on cross-examination, the half-second calculation of how much the other side actually has before deciding whether denial is still an option. "That's not what happened," she said. "You're twisting a private conversation." I took out the folded transcript, set it on the table, didn't raise it, didn't wave it, just let it sit there the way exhibits sit on a table waiting to be entered into evidence. "I told you I was recording, at the start of the call. You said fine, whatever, and kept talking. Then you said, and I'm quoting the certified transcript, 'Sign this or lose the house.' It's easier my way." "I was upset," Denise said. "People say things when they're upset." "You said it clearly enough that your own attorney told you it wasn't a winnable position," I said. "That's not me twisting anything. That's a lawyer reading the same words you did." Anthony looked at his mother, then at me, then back at his mother. "Mom. Is that true? You threatened to fake a will contest?" Denise didn't answer him. She reached for her water glass instead, which in 19 years of watching people avoid answering questions under oath, I've learned is its own kind of answer. Denise didn't pursue a will contest. Her own attorney, once he'd reviewed the recording and the clean probate history from both 2011 and 3 years ago, told her plainly there was no viable legal theory left to file, and that continuing to threaten one after being told that in writing could itself expose her to a harassment claim. She dropped it entirely within 2 weeks. I didn't press charges over the extortion language. Priya and I discussed it at length, and I decided the cease and desist, the clear title, and the closed door were enough. I wasn't trying to destroy my aunt. I was trying to stop being the only person in this family who ever gets asked to prove things happened the way she remembers them. Anthony and I talk more now than we used to. He apologized, unprompted, for the years he'd half believed his mother's version of the 2015 loan story. I told him he didn't owe me that apology, but I appreciated it anyway. The house is still mine, title untouched, deed exactly as clean as it's always been. I still keep the transcript, though I don't think I'll ever need it again. Some documents you keep not because you expect to use them, but because they're proof that a thing you said happened to you, actually did. Here's what 19 years of certifying other people's words taught me that almost cost me my own house to relearn personally. The truth doesn't need you to shout it. It just needs you to write it down accurately, once, and let it stand. I've spent my whole career trusting the record over the retelling. I finally learned to do that for myself, too. That's my story, one threatening phone call, one word of warning that I was recording, and a transcript that ended an argument my aunt's own lawyer couldn't win. If you've ever had to prove a conversation happened exactly the way you said it did, tell me in the comments. Subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.